I did show this to somebody who has early stage AMD, or at least a little bit of stuff related to faces, and she got it. Like, she could tell the different expressions, but then she just said, "But it's not really them, is it?" You know, and that was interesting because there was something about, she wanted to see the veridical face and not the accented one. But I think it really depends on how much sight you've got. It's definitely the right thing to do for faces.
And you might get into learning it. Have you heard, there's a quite famous experiment done decades ago where volunteers wore glasses that made the world look upside down.
Yeah.
And after a certain period, the world looked the right way up. When they took the glasses off them, they had to relearn yet again. Yeah. So you could probably learn even something very different to normal reality to the point where you became unaware that you were interpreting something really weird.
Yeah. No, the visual system's great like that. I mean, we adjust to dark rooms and bright rooms and changes in colour. You know, there's your expectation of the form, which starts to change your actual visual input. I mean, that's why I really wanted to make something which was not too abstract, but gave a nice, a reliable spatial representation. Because you know roughly the size of things, and you know roughly the speed at which they'll move. So if we kept close to that, or true to that, then people should be able to ideally put their memory and expectations of what things look like onto that.
And yet, even if it was very different, they might, after wearing the glasses for a week or so, something they didn't like initially.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of weird stuff like, you know, Fourier transforms.
Yeah, right.
I can think of, somebody might.
Yeah, so some of the work from, there's a researcher called Ahmedi, I forget his last name, find out for it if you like it. But he's done a lot of stuff with auditory substitution, and particularly looked at people's responses neurally, so stick them in an fMRI after learning for a couple of weeks to see using just sound. And as you'd expect, like visual cortex regions for faces and different objects start to become associated. They weren't there originally, but you gradually start to learn that this particular sequence means this particular thing, and then after a while you shortcut that. So you never even go that intermediate step, you just go, that's that thing. Yeah, it doesn't take very long, even if you're using sound instead of sight. So potentially if something looks a bit more like it does, you should be able to get through that learning stage quite quickly, I think. Nice thing about this, we could turn the cameras upside down and do that same experiment. I add an extra challenge.
Perhaps of no help to you, but I was startled last week in the zoology seminar when Russell Foster told us that if you had no rods and cones in your eyes, so you couldn't see anything, you would still keep your correct daily rhythms, assuming you're not in a cave where there's no light. If there's some environment where there is light, as he claims, there's a third kind of light receptor in your eye.
Yeah, we discovered that. Early 90s, I think it was, but it was Imperial. They've been blinding rats. They've been looking at circadian rhythm basically, and trying to work out how they were so in tune with that. And then after getting rid of all the rods and cones, there was still this perception. So they discovered a different type of light receptor, which is all throughout the eye, which allows you to just very, very gradually get the sinusoid of the day-night cycle. So we thought about, one of his theses is that it's based on a particular blue spectrum. So it's one of the major spectrums from clear day. I don't know how it works in the UK, but a blue day. And if you look at too much blue light towards the end of the day, you'll skew your circadian rhythm or your sleep cycle out. So he's always suggesting don't use your mobile phones right at the end. It's obviously a losing battle. The time course for that is very slow. So we had thought about whether there was any reason bringing in blue light as a way to stimulate that, because in most people it still does exist. But the response time for melanopsin is the light receptive chemical for that. Has a time course of several minutes. So you'll never be able to see anything fast enough with that. But I've put that to him as well, that we'll tune the blue component out during the night, so you're not staring at this constant blue all day long and get you sleeping. So it'll be a nice little addition that won't cost anything, and terms of programming. That's nice.
Would it be easily feasible to build gaze direction detection into the glasses, or would that be too cumbersome?
Yeah, so we have, yeah, it is too hard, the shortcut. One of the things that would be great to do would be to always keep the maximum amount of image into the area that the person can see best of all. So if you've only got central vision, you don't need a full screen, you only need what's right in the middle. So if I looked across to the side, I'd like to put all my maximum information back in there. Our lab is primarily an eye tracking lab for oculomotor functions for Parkinson's is mainly work that we used to do, or I used to do quite a lot of. They have very unusual eye movements and you can track disease progress and things like that. And it's fine if you've got a long time to set things up and everyone's really still, but if you're carrying it around on a headset, even if it's right next to your eye, you'll drift over time. It's very hard to get it right back. You'll be able to look in terms of quadrants quite reliably, but otherwise real-time eye tracking is going to be quite a challenge. We do a visual field assessment just by default at the beginning because we would like to know where people's maximum sensitivity is, and had thought about whether we would put more into that. But it turns out that another learning about visually impaired people, even if you've got a central scotoma, you still got a lot of light detection in there, especially if you've got a bright light source in front. So we didn't need to do anything to really maximally affect this. And people would, having this, particularly for the last one where you've just got a small region of light right in the middle, people would just find their own sweet spot and then look at what they've got left. Actually, for AMD, what you end up getting is a second region of the brain involved, a second fovea, or a second sensitive area in your visual cortex, if you pay enough attention to it. A lot of people with AMD, it's understandable, they just kind of give up. But if you really work at it, you can develop a higher sensitive visual acuity region just off from your fovea, and that will be manifest in the MRI. You'll be able to see that. So that's it would be. I think for some people it definitely would be an advantage, but the technical aspects of it, I mean, all things are hard, but that's particularly challenging. Yeah.
So how personalized are these individual glasses for the person? So you mentioned having the different diseases.
Yeah. So the main things that we look at are contrast sensitivity. If you're right at the end of sight, you'll only really have binary contrast, and that's good to know at the beginning. So I mean, all these are really, we built exactly the same hardware, but we just changed the software. So if you've only got binary contrast detection, then you can just trim everything down. You say you're not going to be able to see more than 2.5 meters with this. Everything's always going to be bright. There'll be no grayscale, and you can do that quite easily. The other one is visual field. So if you've got a very contracted visual field, it's often, it would be nice to have eye tracking, but what we do is we squash a lot of the information down towards the center so you can get more of your peripheral vision at one time. But the other one, and we haven't really employed this very much, is color detection. I'd say about at least half the people we meet who are registered blind still can't see color, which again is, and I haven't for me, I didn't realize it was going to be like that. And with color, we can tag things in different ways. So I don't remember the picture I put up earlier on where Phil had gone and found pedestrians and walls and roads and things like that. The way to signify different semantic categories, the simplest way is just to color code it. It would mean that you'd abstract them, and again, it'd be interesting to see how well people intuitively learn that a green blob is always a person, a red thing is always a door. But if you've got color, then you've got a much better palette that you can use to describe the world. If you don't have color, then you have to do, basically we flash things in different rates, kind of making lighthouses out of stuff. Certain frequencies will denote certain classes of objects, which is possible to learn. It's odd the first few times, but yeah, I mean that's the level of customization basically. Actually, probably in order to be complete about that, the previous one that I showed, this one here, is a high resolution screen which we'd all see. You'd be able to watch a movie on it. It's fine, and that won't be useful for people who have got basic levels of sight. So there is that general class, which of these two you go for. I don't want to say that one because someone's already made that. There's also the question about when you include audio in the descriptions as well. That's another nice, I mean obviously it's the right way in order to convey which person is in front of you. If you don't have enough sight to see those little local town. But sound is so important for orienting yourself within a room that you don't want to block out ambient sound for the sake of your own abstract interpretations of the world. You need to be very careful. You could use bone conduction so you can hear both things at the same time, but sound is so much more important to someone who's got very limited sight that you want to leave that out as much as possible. Maybe if you've got good sight, you can include more, be another customization. Ideally, we want to make these things as simple as possible, so you run a basic startup routine that essentially does a visual test on you, and then it will set your parameters. But I do think that for a lot of people, getting these home and being able to twiddle with the knobs and trying to find your right setting is it's what people would prefer. I think it's very good. Yeah.
Two things. First, I would just suggest for sound, perhaps a button on the side of the glasses they can push, to say the person's name. Then it wouldn't, be automatic, and they could just choose, because I know that's very helpful. Like the watches that tell the time verbally and whatnot.
Yeah, a bit more on demand than automatically speaking.
And plus a lot of times they'll mishear it, or there'll be loud noises and they want to repeat it. And secondly, I'm just going to ask more about the depth perception. When I've worked with people with low vision in the past, they're far more than anything, I would say, they get this serious fear of falling when they approach any stairs or any curbs. And that really hampers their life because they're different heights, and they become very, very afraid of anything that's a stair or a curb. So that would be a serious. So I guess how good is the depth perception? How much can you actually get across? How much more are you working on it? That kind of.
So I thought about this quite a lot because it was really the key thing was to get a three-dimensional spatial understanding. So distance from an object to you is the key part. Translating that into brightness was a good first step. Like it definitely gave us near and far. But a lot of people that I've worked with, once I don't have good enough video to represent that, but once things become relatively close, like within the last metre and a half, there's really very little change in the brightness. You can see it, on a computer monitor, but once it's next to your eye, it's just on. So people will see the object. Actually, in the example when she was walking towards the obstacles, as soon as she saw them, she really didn't know how far away they were from there. So some people kind of gingerly creeping forward and trying to assess that themselves. That's a bit of a problem, I think. So one way around that, or one addition to that, has been working with actual binocular displays. So driving different eyes and getting a natural three-dimensional, stereoscopic vision approach, and that gives you an intuition of depth, which won't work if you've only got one functional eye. So you kind of go back to the brightness again. I've been thinking quite a bit about how to get reliable information, particularly for the last metre, to know that that's now really important. We've got a few tricks left, such as changing the rate in which it updates, or providing, in some senses, providing outlines for things that are further away, and then providing just block filling for things that are nearby. In terms of curves, it's a major challenge. We can detect the drop-off relatively easy, but this is the problem with working with off-the-shelf gear. Everyone makes cameras which are letterbox size, which is great for us because horizontal and things like that. But if you want to look at stuff down, really you should turn the camera sideways. So you've got the portrait one, which is spending a lot of time looking down. So we do a bit of stuff trying to angle it. And you can see on that one there, the camera is pointing about 10 degrees down, just to get a better idea about the floor, so you can pop these up. But in some senses, I think there's going to be, at least for the early ones, there's going to be a whole lot of behaviours learnt about scanning around. We can do a little bit of stuff with three-dimensional mapping, so actually building a 3D environment. The data coming in is you call it a point cloud. I don't know if you've come across the term very much, but it's all the data is in a 3D volume, and you can mesh that, turn it into basically like a low-resolution 3D environment, which you can register again and again. So if you learn where steps are, you can always, you can find yourself in that environment and then highlight very strongly, even if you don't really detect it, the stairs are coming up. Doesn't mean that you've got a whole bunch of failure points that you build into it again and again. But I guess as we learn more about it, we realise that depth, the actual reliable critical distance to objects is not our strong point. It's something that needs to be worked on. For many people, actually, the brightness of objects when you get close to them can be really off-putting, because if you actually can see objects, what happens is you get, like, it's quite a nice effect, but it's a bit strange. So if you put your hand out in front, you can just see the whole thing glow, but it means that you can't really see the hand anymore. So for some people, it's much, much better to do outlines, and that gives you, using depth to produce the outlines is really nice, because then it alerts you to something, but it doesn't impede your actual view of the object. And that's just, I thought it was going to be really hard to do, but actually just lining the virtual image to the actual real world is actually quite simple. So that's another option.
Any more questions? Okay.
Great. Thanks very much.
It's almost 9:30. Thank you all for coming. We are having our annual general meeting, not much of a meeting here, but we'll be having our committee elections right after this. So anyone who's interested in running for a position, please do stay and have some snacks, and we can talk about what roles you're going to do. But in any case, thank you, Stephen, for coming. We will be in touch with you and invite you for more dinner, hopefully, in the future.
Sure.
Okay. Right. You're free to stay and have some coke and stuff.
All right.
By the way, even if you're not running for stuff, you can still have drinks and nibbles outside.